All right, let's see what's going on here with this important summit meeting that I think they're coming to an end on. That has been a successful meeting for not just the United States, but for the Europeans in general. Tick-tack, paddywhack, give a dog a bone, whistle man come rolling home. Let's listen, please.
Ukraine's Zelensky in Lithuania any minute now. You can see them in the room. They just sat down. Let's listen.
How much support you have. It's real. And I hope we finally have put to bed the notion about whether or not Ukraine is welcome in NATO. It's going to happen. We're all moving in the right direction. I think it's just a matter of getting by the next few months here. So thank you. And, it's hard to believe, 500 days. It's easy for me. Just mostly, I've been in Ukraine a lot before the war, in some sense the war, but I'm going to say again what I've said to you many times. Not only all of you, but your people, your sons, your daughters, your husbands, your wives, your friends. You're incredible. Ukraine, the whole world's seeing the courage. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. The courage and commitment for the average Ukrainian. When you see a 65-year-old woman on television after her apartment's been bombed out, picking up the pieces and going to help the next door neighbor. I mean, it's just astounding. You're setting the example for the whole world of what constitutes genuine courage. I mean, from the bottom of my heart, I mean that. What courage means. And, I think it's your resilience and your resolve has been a model for the whole world to see. And the frustration, I can only imagine. I know you're many times frustrated about when things get to you quickly enough and what's getting to you and how we're getting there. But I promise you, the United States is doing everything we can to get you what you need as rapidly as we can get it to you. And the Secretary of Defense has been a constant, how can I say it, refrain from the Defense Department and everywhere else and calling other secretaries of defense around the world to say, let's get some help. So I just want you to know it's real. And here in Vilnius, we held the first, as you well know, NATO-Ukraine Council. But you talked about this beforehand, about the commitments, the security commitments we were going to make while it becomes official, until it becomes official. And I think that's important. And I want to tell you, when I got here as president, and I started to sell that idea to other heads of state, there was no reluctance. There was no, oh, I don't want to. It was everybody just said, okay, let's sign on. So it's real. You've done an enormous job. You have a lot more to do, I know, and I just think that we're going to make sure that you get what you need. And I look forward to the day when we're having the meeting celebrating your official membership in NATO. So thank you for what you're doing, and the bad news for you is we're not going anywhere. You're stuck with us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I will start. You said about 500 days is really a difficult job for our people, soldiers and civilians, mother, fathers and children, really to fight for their life, for their life and for these values. And thank you, reminded all these days you are with us. I mean, you and Americans, all of Americans and Congress. I mean, thank you, Mr. President, that you, like we say, shoulder to shoulder with us from first days of full-scale war. We appreciate for this very much, and really, we understand your leading support, because when you give such messages and when you gave sometimes some weapon, I'm sorry, but I want to say it to journalists, like I said during our meeting, our council, that it's very simple, to criticize, for example, clusters ammunition, which you made difficult political decision, but you have to know that Russia used such weapon from the first days, not only full-scale war, from first days of occupation of Crimea from 2014 and 15, in all our territories. In Donbass they used it, and now they continue doing it. And that you gave us, this decision will help us to save us. And that's why my appreciation for this. And I didn't hear from all the parts of the world when Russia began to use it. I didn't hear that some of countries criticized Russia. But I think that it was very useful to put them. So thank you so much for this help. We really counted on it, not only on this. I mean, that's totally. And you gave us huge support. I want to thank to all Americans. We understand that it's more than 43 billion for today. It's big support, and I understand that it's all your money, but you have to know that you spend this money for not just for fighting. You spend this money for our lives, and I think that we save the lives for Europe and for all the world. So thank you very much for this also summit. At the end of the summit we had, I think, this council and great success and security guarantees, as you said, that we began to speak about it in Kiev. So now we see that you had great idea, that G7, and now I know that last message that also there are countries which join to G7 decisions, and I think it will help very much, because it's really fact that it's very concrete things. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for acknowledging the American people. I think it's correct that we are a large country, but I think we've given more than every other nation combined in terms of assistance and cost. And the American people are supportive. They're supportive because they know it's about you. It's about more than you. It's about innocent people around the world, and the absolute brutality with which Putin is acting and the Russians are moving on. It's just like something out of the 14th century, the way they're acting. And so, but I can't emphasize enough. And by the way, I know you thanked him, but I think we talked about it before I went to Tokyo a couple years ago. The idea that Kishida is increasing their defense budget, having to lower their domestic budget to aid directly and get directly involved in what's happening in Ukraine is remarkable. The sad, sad news is you're in this situation. The incredible news is it's bringing the world together. It's bringing the world together in a way that it's a hell of a price to pay. But it's bringing the world together, and people are realizing that you just can't stand by and let this kind of aggression occur. At any rate, I thank you, and we got a lot to talk about, so somebody's going to have to say the press has to leave.
President Zelensky, are you satisfied with what you got from NATO? You were so frustrated yesterday. Is this enough? Are you satisfied, sir?
Okay, looks like they are not taking questions. You've been listening to President Biden and Ukraine's President Zelensky. Oh, wait, let's listen in again, guys, if we can. It looks like Ukraine's President Zelensky is speaking.
Success for this summit. I think so, but it's my opinion. Thank you.
President Zelensky, how soon after the war would you like to be in NATO? How soon after the war would you like to join NATO?
An hour and 20 minutes. You guys ask really insightful questions.
Tic tac, paddywhack, give a dog a bone, whistle man come rolling home. President Zelensky, I think, has done a remarkable job on the record pertaining to how that he was originally a comedian and was promoted this particular job by his people, and then all of a sudden for this to have been dumped into his lap, for him to inherited such of a defeat or a challenge like this, it could have been a defeat in which the war is not over yet, but from all indications, Russia has bit off more than they can chew, the Russian government. And the quicker that the oligarchs over there will use President Putin basically for an scapegoat in worming and squirming and crawfishing their way out of all this, the better off the world will be in general. Now, rather not those ambassadors around the Federal Federation desires to do that or not, that will be up to them. But according to all things that I have seen and witnessed just within the past few days pertaining to this meeting, in which I've been trying to keep out of it because it is strictly a political affair, the bottom line is President Putin is defeated. He is defeated from within, and he is defeated on a world stage. So the quicker that those associates around him can identify that, and like I said, usually whenever a mistake like this is made, it costs dearly in the leadership of that in which what was done. And if they have any type of desire to want to pick back up the pieces and go again and get back on the world stage towards being an asset to the world rather than a liability, they need to refrain from their original desires in thinking that they was going to be able to pull this off just within a matter of days or weeks in it being accomplished. So it is a success today in the fact that our presidency over here in America has made the right decision, in which, as I was listening to both sides a while ago in their comments, my mind for some reason went back to President Trump. And I thought to myself as I was listening to their comments, you know, how much different could things have turned out today in comparison to if Trump did get elected on the second election, in which we know that he didn't. But by the snarling and the undermining that he was already pulling off with the Ukrainian government, and how that he was already siding to and with President Putin, how much different would have things have been today, 500 days later, a year and a half later into this war? How much different would have things have been today in comparison to if Trump would have become president? I think it could have made 1,000 to 1 all the difference in the world towards this country that man represents right there on the left-hand side. Zelensky, I think it would have made all the difference in the world towards whether or not the world would have been able to have stood up and rightfully represented a country that was being picked on by a bunch of bullies, versus somebody like Trump that could, I'm not saying that he would have, that could have very well sided with the president of Russia, and the next thing you know, this whole country would have been basically abolished. I mean, we know that Putin's and his government, his army, has been wanting to genocide these people. We know that he has broken every violation pertaining to the Geneva Agreement laws, pertaining to bombing innocent men, women, and children. So, put the perspective upon to the people that did stand up during the presidential election and say, no way, foul, 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 pretending to people being whistleblowers by saying President Trump did not win that election. Now, I also going to pick on local government right here just a little bit pertaining to Alexander that wanted to side, and various people in Congress that wanted to side with President Trump by telling the world, well, yeah, he done wrong, but it wasn't that bad of a deal. In comparison to what went on during the election, towards what various representatives and legislators had to say about Trump, towards him being basically in violation, compare that where we are today, do you think that the outcome would have been totally different? I'm not going to go as far as to say that it would have been totally different, but I am going to go as far as to say that it is not only a possibility, but a probability that, yes, things would have been completely, totally different on the aspect of seeing the Ukrainian government basically becoming squashed, abolished, diminished from the planet towards them ever being a country to begin with. And that would have been speaking volumes to the rest of the world towards just exactly who and what the Americans are. Because we've done already made promises to these people going all the way back into 2014 and 2015, whenever they had their first calamity with one another. We had done already made obligations that we was going to stand with the people in Ukraine, which tells you that our country stood on the right side of history. Now, depending upon the oligarchs in Russia, depending upon other communist-controlled governments, or if you want to call them governments all over the country, that will be up to them towards how they look at this and witness this, as far as historically speaking. But as far as I'm concerned, 2 hands down, I take off my hat to what the Democrat Party has done by standing very, very close to the things that they know to be right. Now, on the other hand, by me saying that, does that mean that I'm full-fledged sold out in all the ideologies pertaining to what the Democrats support and stand for? No, it does not. Does that mean that I'm totally against a lot of the stuff that the Republican Party has made fools of in the past, I'm going to say the past 5-6 years pertaining to Donald Trump? And the answer to that would be absolutely. Absolutely. Now, there'll be certain parties in the Republican Party that would tell you, oh, no. If Donald Trump was president, the occurrence never would have taken place to begin with. They're going to lie to you. And they're going to tell you a bunch of BS. But the fact of the matter is, President Putin and the oligarchs over there, because of what happened with COVID, had already made up their minds that they was going to go in and they was going to whip some ass. That was their whole concept. They was going to prove to the world that they was right, because they felt like that they had been cheated of the original agreement that happened during Ronald Reagan's administration pertaining to ending of the Cold War. And now it has blowed up in their faces. Now we see cracks from within their own party, within their own government, pertaining to various people that are questioning whether or not they should continue to follow after the leadership of this maniac. And like I said a while ago, after today will be affirmative towards where history goes from this moment on of whether or not it's going to continue to grow even worse, or if there's going to be some sensible people within the Federation, the Federal Federation of the government party, that's going to back up and say, you know what? We have bitten off more than we can chew. In the meantime, I'm going to stop right there on this particular deal, and I'm going to back up real quick because there was something that come on a while ago on MSNBC that I was very, very interested in pertaining to the environment. So please bear with me. Now, that was the first time that I had witnessed that particular interview because that just now come on.
This ability, Ed Luce rightly points out, that when he walked into a room in New Hampshire, everybody in...
Let's go on. That ain't what I'm wanting to go to. I've done seen this part that I'm going to show you right here. Right. Nope, that ain't it neither. I don't want to see all that. It's politics. Politics. And the thing about what we're going on right now with the environment should have never been put on a political scale. It should have never been a debate pertaining to us politicizing the damages that's happening all over the world right now pertaining to environmental changes. All right, I think this is it.
Catastrophic.
Let's back up just a tad, right there.
Where we're seeing relief and what's still costing a pretty penny. Also ahead, historic and catastrophic. Floodwaters beginning to recede in Vermont, leaving disaster behind, while the West and the South suffer through record-breaking heat that shows no signs of letting up.
This summer is worse than all of the past summers.
I came to the park prepared because I knew without it I'd die out here.
And more breaking news out of Iowa, where Republicans have passed a 6-week abortion ban. We're live in Des Moines with reaction. It is 10 o'clock Eastern. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. We begin with the breaking news overseas on this final day of the NATO summit. President Biden.
I don't think I backed up enough. Sorry about that.
You can see that.
Truly sorry about that. I didn't back up enough. I'm sorry. Let's go further back. Go further back. Further back. Further back. Further back. Further back. Keep going. That guy right there, that's the guy there that I want to talk about right there. He made a book. He wrote a book. And the name of the book was, I forgot the name of the book. Boy, I tell you where my mind is this morning, don't it? Right there. Name of the book is...
To come and hoping for some relief.
NBC's Priscilla Thompson reporting from Houston. And joining us now, New York Times bestselling author David Lipsky. His new book is titled The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and the Sun.
The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and Science of Denial. This is very interesting that I listened to a while ago before the president was talking, him and the president of the Ukrainian government. Please listen.
Science of Denial. David, good morning. It's great to have you with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
So we're talking about the heat across the country, all over the place. We've seen extreme temperatures, particularly this summer. We've seen flooding up in Vermont, terrible flooding right now in Vermont. It's everywhere you look right now.
I have friends sending me photos from Vermont.
Yeah, no, it's...
And the reason why that I found this so interesting is because this guy put a frame of reference pertaining to how that the American people and the world in general has been brainwashed using psychological analogies regarding that once you're told by somebody again and again and again and again and again, it actually plants a seed to the point that it don't matter if it's true or false, but that's going to be the first thing that you're going to reflect upon towards what that you had been told or heard about earlier. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, you're still going to stick with your guns towards saying, oh, no, the environment always goes through changes, and this is all just normal. Listen to what he's got to say and how that it presents itself.
The pictures are stunning. So your book, The Parrot and the Igloo, you sort of concede when you talk about the book, global warming, climate change books can be a little dry. And so this is more of a narrative story, all based in fact, and a true story. Where do we pick it up?
Where do we pick it up, the story, or where do we pick up the book? Because the book is available at fine stores everywhere.
Well, that I think we can find the book. The story, though, where do we pick up the story?
Well, the story begins right from the start. It begins with Thomas Edison inventing electricity, right? And then we go right from 1956. It's the reason I wrote the book. In 1956, Time magazine, not the hardest thing to find. Time magazine is a publication that Walter knows very well. And one of the first American climate scientists, Roger Revelle, said, in about 60 years, there will be big changes. They could have a violent effect on the culture, on the climate rather, and we'll know if there'll be things like salt water flowing in the streets of New York and London.
Now, what he just got to saying is not an ideology. That is a fact in what that individual had to say around 60 years ago. Please listen.
It took us about 20 years, let's say, to knock down the science. And then in 79, that's what I was thinking when I was watching the great the B-roll we were watching just now. President Carter asked a special study session of the National Academy of Sciences to say, look, is this going to happen or not? And they returned a very quick verdict. They said, the conclusions of this panel will be reassuring for scientists, but disturbing for policymakers. We find no reason to doubt that if carbon dioxide continues to increase, that climate changes will result, and no reason to believe they will be negligible. And the broadcast we just saw is non-negligible climate change.
And from those warnings was born, as you get at in the book, an entire culture of denialism to say this isn't actually happening. It's certainly not happening as fast as the global climate change alarmists are telling us. How did that side of the movement grow?
I think it grew because it was interesting what Mika was saying before about abortion. When we look at data, sometimes it means we have to act. And so we've developed a culture across the board on a number of issues, right, where we can just keep looking at the data and keep arguing and refining, right? And that always plays into the hands of people who don't want a final decision reached and who don't want action. So there was money behind it. Sorry, Mike.
Excuse me for interrupting you, but how is it, David, that this is such a visual and physical issue in the world, not just the United States? You can feel the heat. You can feel when you're freezing. You can see the water coming up through your kitchen floor in a flood. How is it that with all of this physical, visible evidence, that climate deniers get away with saying, no, that's not really happening?
They prepare us. They give us a way of looking at things. And so if you give someone the screen to examine something through, then when they examine, they see what you've asked them to see. It's how a magic trick works, basically. So if you tell people the climate is always changing, and then you get something really hot, a really hot summer, it's like, well, I remember hearing from an authority figure that the climate always changes, so this can't be that big a deal. The thing that you were asking reminds me of the famous example that former Vice President Gore used, which is the frog analogy. That if you put a frog in boiling water, it will jump right out, but if you put it in lukewarm water, it will stay until it gets too hot, which is what's happened to us. One of the fun things in the book is that's not true. In fact, some scientists the frogs will jump right out immediately. Yeah. And the only creatures that will stay in that water over 40 or 50 years, it turns out, are us.
Now, tell me, we talked about...
And why is that? It's because once a society has been given into an out-and-out lie, I'm gonna use this as an analogy. It has a psychological bearing upon that group of people that bought into that lie. Before Columbus sailed the seven seas, and he wound up supposedly finding America, in which he didn't discover America, he only found America. The world up until that time was basically looked upon as being a world of mysteries, unsolved mysteries, and doubt. And some even believed, as crazy as it may sound to this day, some even believed that the world was flat, and the reason why that the sailors never come back was because they went to the edge of the earth and they fell off. Of course, you can go back another 300 to 500 years before that, going back into the 12th, 11th century, back during the Crusaders. There was actually people that believed that the moon was made out of cheese. because the only thing that they could identify towards it having light spots versus dark spots was a piece of cheese. And that's the reason why that there was people that bought into that lie, that probably died with that lie, as crazy as this may sound, of believing that the moon was made out of cheese. Just like there was people that believed that the world was flat, and that's the reason why that the sailors never come back home. Once you plant that seed of discrepancies, once you plant that seed of doubt, once you plant that seed of controversial whatever, you have now began the process, psychologically speaking, in brainwashing that person in believing what you're telling them to believe. And it doesn't matter if it's believable or not believable, or right or wrong. If you tell a certain amount of people the same thing again and again and again, eventually you will win them over. That was the whole concept in behind Hitler in the Nazism movement that actually began in the very late 1920s, that was more evident in people coming to America in the 30s, that was preaching their ideology pertaining to communism, of it being the fair and the right way to go as far as socialist. They was trying to plant that seed in people's hearts and in people's minds that that was the proper and the right thing to do. That way, whenever the war finally did break out involving World War II, you would have communist sympathizers that would be more sympathetic towards wanting to support the things of Hitler versus destroy the things of Hitler. This is all the works of a spirituality movement pertaining to the Luciferian Lucifer. That once Lucifer done what he done in retaliation to the kingdom of God, and they kicked him out of heaven, and it says in the Bible that there was war in heaven over this. Literal war in heaven. Ever since then, he has been using the same strategy towards trying to convince, working on a numbers game of convincing not just the Americans but the world in general that the things that he believed in and the things that he was doing and why that he was doing them was above the board and was more right and more righteous than the things that they was fighting up against pertaining to fighting against the kingdom of God. You keep in mind, everything that Lucifer has ever stood for has been the very opposite of a righteous God. When God says, thou shalt not kill, Lucifer is all about killing. He's not only killed himself, he's not only killed the evangelical world that followed after him, but he's also involved in wanting to kill the world. That's the reason why so many people bought it hook, line, and sinker pertaining to the climate deniers. That, oh no, this wasn't real. Oh no, this wasn't real. And if we would have continued to have stayed on that path, I promise you, without a big, big red flag coming up, just within the past 2 years of the Biden administration, I guarantee you, we was heading towards doom and gloom, and we may have already passed over the threshold to the point that we can't reverse it to begin with. I think that we can slow it down, but as far as us reversing the forces of nature and what we're seeing right now pertaining to the warming of the oceans, pertaining to all these massive volcanoes that has increased in the past 30 years over 300%, as we're seeing all these major events happening either on the planet or above the planet, there's no doubt we are on a trajectory of doom. And up until 2 years ago, there was still the majority of the people that was saying, oh, climate, that's just part of the process. The world goes through these same events every so many 100 years, and it'll get warm during one event, and then it'll get hot during another event. And these was all lies that was being promoted by the Luciferian Lucifer, because the Luciferian Lucifer is nothing more than a liar. He's always been a liar and a murderer from the front, from the get-go. And my point being is that if us, those that did stand up and take a risk in being knocked down again, if we didn't stand up in standing up for the right causes, we could have very well walked off into our abyss, walked off into our own Achilles heel. And until we can convince people like over in China and other major superpowers of the same thing, we're basically beating a horse that won't ever arise, because it's going to take a global movement to turn these occurrences around. And it's also going to take a spiritual movement pertaining to God intervening towards the damages that we've already did, not only to ourselves, but also to the planet, and most definitely to God Almighty himself. So the great deceiver that the Bible talks about did in fact deceive the world. That's the reason why the Bible, in the King James Version Bible, discusses over in Revelations, after the 7-year tribulation period during the false prophet and the Antichrist reign, after the 1,000-year millennium, when God shall rule and reign here upon the planet, where every knee will bow and every tongue will profess that Christ is and was and will always be who Christ said that he was. Okay? There will be a short period, the Bible says for a short season, Lucifer will be released in having that same ability, that same type of influence towards influencing a group of people in the supernatural world, in the spirit world. And it says, according to the Bible, that they was deceived again of those that followed Lucifer and his army into Gog and Magog. You cannot deceive a group of people for the second time towards it being again, unless you have successfully done that on one other time before that. That is the era that we are in right now in regards towards the world wreaking harsh repercussions because of so many people that bought in to the lie, hook, line, and sinker. And if it wasn't for people like us, I'm going to use Al Gore, and I'm going to use some of those other scientists back 60 years ago, and then the scientists that spoke up in Carter's administration, and they said, we'll get back with you 30 years from now. It was those people that was motivating their compassions off of the wealthy and the rich more so than facts. And it's only been until just recently to where now it is absolutely 1,000% undeniable that human consumption upon this planet and what we're doing to this planet is having a profound effect upon to the forces of nature. So looking at it from the aspect that this gentleman was talking about here that wrote that book, psychologically speaking, not metaphorically speaking, but psychologically speaking, it has driven the world off into a state of where we are today because of those that bought in of being climate deniers, hook, line, and sinker. The same thing would have occurred of those if they would have bought into Donald Trump's lie that the election had been stolen and that he rightfully deserved to have the election. He was doing what he was doing illegitimately. It was illegal, first of all. It was illegitimate, second of all. And third of all, do you really think that the program that you just got through watching at the beginning of this show would have turned out to the point that the president of the Ukrainian government versus the president of the United States would have been coming together in unison in trying to solve this problem that the illegitimacies coming from the Russian oligarchs had done to the innocent lives of civilians, of men, women, and children over in Ukraine. There comes a time, my friends, that we as a society, we have to be a straight shooter in identifying that if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, sounds like a duck, walks like a duck, odds are it's going to be a duck. And whenever the voice of reasoning speaks to the powers at bay, and they continue to keep knocking down the voice of reasoning pertaining to the scientists that began 60 years ago, warning American politicians that this was going to occur. And even 30 years ago, pertaining to Carter's administration, now we're seeing where this has led us down this endless road of despair. And as I've said before, I'll say again, it's all in unison is what the Bible talks about, that as you shall see the days approaching, because of the devastation of humanity, no flesh shall be saved. But because of whom God has chosen, the Bible's very clear in saying that those days would in fact be shortened. So whenever it comes to reversing the climate changes pertaining to these major deluges, these irregularities pertaining to the forces of nature, pertaining to it either being entirely too dry or entirely too hot, or seeing these events happening not just above our heads but also below our feet, I think we have already went over the Rubicon. Now, that doesn't mean that we're just supposed to throw up our hands and give up and say, okay, let's just accept this for what it is. Let's all die in a burning, disastrous world. No. What it means is that we should awaken and fight that much more harder against the climate deniers, and fight that much more harder in trying to resolve this. And once more, it's going to take, just like Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, says that the only thing that can save this planet is God. And that's exactly right. The only thing that's going to reverse the damages that we have done, not just only as Americans, but as Homo sapiens upon to the planet, the only thing that's going to save us now at this point in time is God. And if we don't reach out and cry out to God in what that we have done, we will see the destruction of this world, just as the Bible has already predicted, that as we shall see the days approaching. In other words, we're going to be able to tangibly see it. We're going to feel it. We're going to hear it. We're going to taste it. We're going to see it. As we shall see the days approaching, that no flesh shall be saved. But for the elect's sake whom he has chosen, those days would be shortened. I think that we can prolong it to some degree, though we may not stop it, though we may not reverse it. I think that we can prolong it if we all put our heads together in pulling as a team or a unit. If we're not willing to do that on a global international level, then it doesn't matter what one continent does versus the other 6, or even what 2 continents does versus the other 5. If all 7 continents does not pull together towards doing the same thing, then we're not going to be able to prolong it, much less stop it. And I know the information I'm giving to you right now is not a popular message, especially to the agriculture communities that I'm living around, because at one time I used to farm, my family and I used to farm about 500 acres right here in Northwest Tennessee. So I know what I'm talking about is not what especially farming families want to hear. The businesses of the farming community wants to hear. But it's the fact. There comes a time to where you can no longer deny the truth. And whenever you put that in the perspective of what I'm talking about on the spirituality aspect of it, and then if you'll put what this gentleman right here is talking about that wrote this book on the psychological aspect of it, now you got Winston Churchill that said it was an event that was what did he say? Looking at the American Civil War, it was no way that we could do it deterred from the event because it was I can't even pronounce the word right now. It was set in stone towards it being the perfect storm in what Winston Churchill said about the Civil War, that it was going to happen regardless whether we wanted it to or not. And the reason why is because certain analysts, certain people did not catch it in time to be able to change it. My perspective about all that is that if America would have done the proper and right thing after the 9 tapes circulated to the White House in the March of 1988, shortly after March of 1988, if America would have done the proper and right thing in the ending of the Cold War with the old Yugoslavia government and the rest of the world, we would not be in the position that we are right now. Period.
These extreme events in Texas, I see it's like over 110 degrees in places like Phoenix and Austin even, and we see the floods. But people say, okay, those are weather events. They're not directly related to climate. How do you show that they are, or do we know that they are?
The reason why that they are is because of all the gizmos and gadgets that the humans have created. And the reason why that they are is by cutting down all the trees. And the reason why they are is because of us not paying attention to what we're doing to ourselves and what we're doing to the planet. The reason why they are is because of us steadily draining the oil below our feet that was put there for a protection shield that is getting thinner and thinner every day as we continue to stay on fossil fuel. And by it getting thinner, it's causing the heat to expand from the center core of the earth that is approximately 10,000 degrees. If you'll add that on top of all the other stuff going on worldwide, now you can pretty well get the picture by looking at what you're looking at right there, with the atmosphere becoming that much more hotter, holding that much more moisture. And then whenever it does release the moisture, it doesn't just release it normally, it releases it abnormally to the degree that it becomes a deluge. We had the same thing happen here about 2 years ago over in Waverly, Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, Humphreys County, that basically killed over 20 plus people, and to this day they still haven't fully recovered from that, and I don't know that they'll recover from it 20 years from now. Because whenever something like that occurs, it is absolutely devastating to that whole community. Just like this community that you're looking at right here, this is a long-term deal that will affect people's lives if they're already 40, 45 years old, for the rest of their lives. It will affect them in some sort of way. There's going to be buildings that they thought that was insured that the insurance won't pay for because they didn't have flood insurance. There's going to be assessments made and where that they should rebuild buildings again. And how can we prevent from this ever happening again? There's going to be community organizers that's going to get together and they're going to say, well, this is the reason why it happened. It's because of this, this, and this wasn't taken care of. We didn't have big enough outlets for the water to go off of. Well, whenever you get to looking at the mountain ranges, and that's exactly what happened in Waverly, Tennessee, with the mountain being beside them, that caused all that water to break loose off the hillside. There's really no way that you can prevent from this happening again if it was to happen again, because of the low-lying areas. This is the reason why Jesus said to flee into the mountains when they shall tell you that these occurrences are happening. Because the weather is going to become unfocused. It's going to be imbalanced, to the point that we no longer see normal rainfalls. Now we see heavy rainfalls. And it just hasn't happened once or twice. We're having a pattern of these occurrences happening, and in some places, like over in Pakistan, it didn't just flood a neighborhood, but it flooded a third of the country. That dismantled over 10 million people. Over in Italy, over in France, over in some Paris, over in some of them other places where these deluges has come out of the sky and just caused China, Japan, all over the world, to where these things are happening again and again and again. These are undebatable facts. These are undebatable facts.
That's one of the fun things about the book. There were all these warnings, right? So there's two things. Probably the most famous American climate scientist is a guy named Jim Hansen.
Oh, yeah.
And what he said is, Mike, Brother Willie, I interrupted you. What were you going to say about Dr.
No, go ahead.
Got it. What he said is, it's random. So climate is just the accumulation, and weather is sort of random. And he used to have these big, like, fuzzy dice, the kind you put in the, in the rear view. And he said that essentially climate change that we were forcing is like loading the dice. So that before you would roll it and you might have 8 over 90-degree things. But if you keep loading the dice, then it's more likely to get 10, and then more likely to get 12. So that was how he explained the difference between weather and climate.
Joe?
Yeah, David, I've told the story a few times on this show, but now seems like a good time to repeat it. I was spending time with a guy who probably has never voted for a Democrat in his life. He's one of the more conservative political people that I've been around. And I asked him at one point, because he's a leader in the insurance industry. I said, so it seems like you guys are paying out a lot of money for natural disasters these days. I know you're really conservative. What's your position on climate change? And he laughed at me. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, I can show you what we were paying 20 years ago. I can show you what we were paying 10 years ago. And I will show you what we're paying this year. He said, you would have to be a fool to not know, not believe, to not know that climate change is upon us, and the result is nothing less than catastrophic. And my God, that was 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's only gotten worse for him. It's only gotten worse for other insurance companies. Again, I have no sympathy for insurance companies, but you just look at the data, the climate catastrophes, what they're paying out now, no comparison.
And the thing about the things that Winston Churchill talked about towards it being unavoidable, this could have been avoided. This could have been avoided. Just like the Civil War could have been avoided. If the right people would have sat down before it ever got as deeply involved with the bloodshed as what it did, if somebody would have put reason with common sense, they could have said that this bloodbath is going to be a losing proposition with both sides. Similar towards how that fortunately we've got people that has looked at a nuclear war towards it being a no win-win situation for both sides. This damage that we're going through right now, even going back into the early 2000, whenever Al Gore was running for president here in the state of Tennessee, of being the vice president of Bill Clinton because of his popularity. If people would have listened to his message and accepted his message for what his message was saying, this all could have been avoided. So whenever the people in Waverly, Tennessee, that had over 20 plus lives get destroyed in less than just a matter of minutes, and to this day they're still never going to fully recuperate from all that damage, because this is something that's going to be a decade or two to recover from. Them people in Waverly, Tennessee needs to look very, very harshly at the Republican Party, because it was the Republican Party that put out the lies not only about climate changes at that time, but put out the lies that if the Democrats become president, that they was going to go to house, taking everybody's amendment rights from them by taking their guns from them, and Al Gore wasn't nothing more than an owl lover or a tree hugger. That was the imagery that the Republicans put out, that the world by and large bought into, because the state of Tennessee didn't even hold up their own didn't even hold up their own man. Of all people, not to hold up their own man, knowing that the man that was running for president was from the state of Tennessee, of how grateful that it would have been if their own man would have become president in their own state, they retaliated against their own man. Why? Because they had already bought into the lie. Hook, line, and sinker. Because of the oil, petroleum typhoons that had already put out to the rest of the world that global warming was of our imaginations. That's the reason why I continue to harp upon Shell, Exxon, Valve, all the rest of them, that as far as I'm concerned, they need to go to jail. They need to be held accountable for what that they have done to people's lives that are now suffering. And I just recently heard this as of yesterday of an individual that was out in California to where suddenly, all of a sudden, you have these mansions, homes out there are worth $4, $5, $6 million or more, maybe $10 or $12 million, that are basically the whole hillside is given way. And they've already destroyed something like 10 or 12 homes, and they say that it may get to the point that they have to evacuate another 20 or 30 homes because the whole hillside is given away. These people ain't built on a cliff. They was built on good, solid, stable ground. But they're saying because of all the deluges that hit last winter, whenever California got bombarded by all those rains, that it done something to that hillside. And that is what is causing right now. And there was one of the individuals that they asked him, is your house destroyed? And he said, yes. And he said, as far as I'm concerned, certain people should be held accountable for it because somebody dropped the ball. And man, did they ever. I'm fortunate. I feel fortunate that I'm living in an area right now that hasn't been hit with major doom. But we're basically sitting on a walking, talking time bomb right here pertaining to the New Madrid fault. That whenever you drain the oil and you have all these titanic plates that move around, we know that they move around. Some of them go on top of each other. Some of them go below each other.
But whenever those titanic plates move and you no longer have oil to lubricate the movement, whenever they do move, they don't just move gradually, they move all at once. Because now it's as if the platelet is basically welded to the other platelet that wasn't originally supposed to have been that way. It's supposed to have had grease in between those platelets. Now, whenever it does move, it just don't move moderately. It moves abruptly. And whenever it moves abruptly, that can cause a catastrophic earthquake that will be not in the 5, 6, 7 range or 8 range, but possibly the 9, 10, and maybe even higher than that range. Because now it moves abruptly versus moderately. In addition to that oil that was put there for a heat shield that we have steadily been draining since Ford created the automobile in the late 1800s, that even to this day, as far as I know, they're still drilling more and more wells and still dragging more and more oil out of the ground that only is increasing and not decreasing. We are on a trajectory of doom and gloom. And yes, it can be prevented if people will awaken. But if you got all these people that's been brainwashed into this lie of the prophetarians, that was telling everybody, oh no, climate change isn't real, global warming isn't real, oh, it was just part of the natural resource of the world changing from one season to another. If you still have people that's brainwashed, it's like, where is your stupid sign? Because somebody obviously needs to give the adults and the baby boomers a stupid sign, those that bought into this hook, line, and sinker, that now all of us are suffering the consequences towards. And as far as I am concerned, OPEC, they do not need to go to jail. They need to go to hell. And what they're doing right now with the PGA Golf League of people playing golf, and what they done to that journalist, and what they done towards masterminding 9/11 that caused the death of 3,000 people, as far as I'm concerned, they need to go to hell. Not jail, but hell. Because those was the ones that deceived and manipulated the world in what we're seeing today towards the consequences of. But yet now, whenever people such as myself speak out about these things, I get ridiculed. I get treated like I'm a disease. I get treated like I'm some sort of a piranha. And the people that are the piranhas are those that bought into this hook, line, and sinker. That still to this day in this area still refuses to acknowledge that they was wrong and I was right the whole time. Not just about global warming, but about all the other state of affairs that they chose purposely, intentionally, consciously to ignore. That has put us where we are today as not only Americans, but as the rest of the world. I cannot speak of it any more plainer than what I'm speaking of it now.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing and what made it a great story is that we had all the warnings. What was frustrating for the scientists, there's a great quote from one of the scientists who briefed lawmakers actually almost exactly 40 years ago. And he went to them and said, look, this is going to happen. We just have the National Academy of Sciences. They are pretty clear this is going to happen. And the lawmakers asked him, well, when are these changes due to arrive? And he said, oh, more or less 40 years. And the politician said, well, get back to us in 39. So one of the things about the book is it shows, it's kind of a great way. It's like those medical tests where you drink a grapefruit flavored thing and it shows you how the whole body works. The great thing about writing this book, which is an incredibly funny story to have both written and I hope to read, is that it shows you the ways that we don't work as well as we used to work. We used to be able to look at a problem, size it up, and take action, and now we've become endless studiers. It's like there's always study period, but never the finals.
Procrastinators. Procrastinators, putting it on the back burner, saying, "Oh, we'll deal with it later. Kick it out, kick it down the road." Kind of like our national debt. Let's kick it down the road. The next generation, the next administration can deal with it. We become procrastinators, thinking that if we deny it long enough, it will go away. Well, you know what the psychiatric community calls that? They call that insanity. Because if you continue to keep doing the same thing, but you're expecting different results, it is a sign of insanity. That's their perspective of it. I call it a sign of being deceived, being blinded. What did Jesus say about the blind? Metaphorically speaking, he said, if the blind lead the blind, they both shall lead it off into the ditch. Bingo! Bingo! You can't get no clear representation or illustration than that. There has been certain politicians that has deliberately, I think, knowingly, driven us off into the state that we're in right now. And it's not just the climate, it's not just the gun violence, it's not just the drugs, the fentanyl, it's not just all the illegal immigrants coming over here, it's not just us being $32 trillion plus. It's the fact that the church world, now I'm going to look at the preachers and the teachers and the administrators in the churches, they have sat idly by and they have put everything on the back burner. Once more, if we take it and put it to the side and act like it's out of sight and out of mind, maybe it'll go away. These people are the ones that has helped to lead us down this same road of doom and gloom, that obviously thought that if they continued to reject the message coming from the messenger of the Windmill Ministries missions, that eventually the Windmill Ministries missions messenger would shut up and he would go away. I'm not going to go away because, first of all, this isn't my message. It's a message coming from God. And it's not my fault that you decided to treat me the way that you've treated me by being not just deniers, but attackers. I'm talking about a whole community, as well as law enforcement, that turned their backs on my brother and I and allowed for a 51-year-old man to become so engulfed in his emotions to the point that it basically drove him to an early death. We're talking about a family that was being hunted, that was being tormented on a day-to-day, everyday level for 3 consecutive years. And then there towards the last, my brother died, and they still pursued their involvement towards attacking me even that much more, because now they knew that I was that much more vulnerable, not only emotionally, but also physically, because I had lost my right-hand man pertaining to my brother, and now I was back down to a one-man show, and that's whenever they decided to hit him at where it's going to hurt. Even my brother, David Jeffrey Jackson, before it got to that level, we had sat down and discussed this. And he looked at me and he said, Juby, he said, you know what this reminds me of? I said, no, David, what does it remind you of other than it being hell? He said, it reminds me of a boxing tournament. He said, whenever one opponent is competing against the other opponent, he said, once that boxer knows that they have brought distress to the other boxer, either in the face or maybe in the rib cage or in some other part of the body, he said that boxer will continue to pound and pound and pound and pound on the same area again and again and again. Because he knows that that's where the crack is. That's where the weakness has begun. And because of it, that's where he's going to continue to pound and pound and pound and pound until more than likely he's going to win the championship. He said, that's what it reminds me of what they're doing to us right now. He said, they are not letting up on us. They are continually bombarding us with all this trouble. And he said this after my brother and I went to court the last time together. And we finally got the charges moved up to another level because my brother said there's no way in hell that I would trust Tommy Moore towards any decision out here, towards him being as biased as he is against this family. He says, we're going to have to request to go to a higher court. And I asked David, I said, well, if that be the case, are you going to help me with the expenses? He said, absolutely. And there towards the last, we hired an attorney from Union City by the name of Bruce Brown. That I don't know if he was a crackhead. I don't know what his problem was, but obviously he dropped the ball because in the process of my brother dying, me grieving, me having to make all these decisions that I hadn't been used to making pertaining to various legal issues that I wasn't involved, that I wasn't familiar with, pertaining to wills and whether or not I was a this or I was a that. In the process, they come out here and arrest me. Why? Because my attorney did not let me know when the arraignment date was due, even though it was my brother and I that requested for the arraignment. So because I didn't make the arraignment date, it had already went up to a higher court, basically a federal court, the state court, and now they put out a warrant for my arrest. Talk about hitting somebody where it was hurting. Talk about using an analogy of two boxers that knows that he had already done hit that competitor and he already done got him hurting in that one area. Talk about them trying to destroy me. That's exactly what they was doing in Northwest Tennessee pertaining to the law. And you don't think that them people up there in Weakley County is going to be held accountable for this? They'll be held not accountable for what happened then in 2017, going all the way back to 2014 whenever I first moved to Northwest Tennessee, but they're going to be held accountable for what they didn't do whenever David himself was fighting the case after my dad died.
It's titled The Parrot in the Igloo, Climate and the Science of Denial. David Lipsky, thank you. The thing I was...
And plus they're going to be held accountable. Going all the way back to the year let me get this right. The year 1989, whenever I first stood out into the eyes of the general public around here, and I was basically chastised or punished whenever the whole society rose up after they confiscated a sword from me in Madison County, arrested me, charged me for a deadly weapon, even though the weapon was made out of aluminum, and even though the weapon was locked into a sword box, and then throwed me in a mental institution. And while I was down in Bolivar, they kept questioning me. Well, Mr. Jackson, you've upset the neighborhood down there. You've upset the community. They all think that something's wrong with you. Yeah, there was something wrong with me. I was trying to warn the people. I was trying to put out warnings just like Al Gore. There was something wrong with me. I cared about the public. I was trying to tell them ahead of time what to expect. But they didn't want to listen to it. A matter of fact, whenever I first started a radio station in 1989, and my mother and my grandmother was still living at the time up in Union City, I'd already went through about 3 or 4 sessions, WENK AM station, while at the time I was working for Jimmy Atkins, which was Mr. Wooden's nephew that used to own a dealership up there in Dresden. He put the word out that tell Mr. Jackson that if he doesn't get off the radio station immediately to seek employment elsewhere. In addition to how all the other people around here, all the other churches rejected me. Rejected me. And it wasn't that I had done anything personally to them, but they was rejecting me because they was rejecting the message. They didn't like the message, and because they didn't like the message, let's make it that much more harder on the messenger, and maybe the messenger will shut his damn mouth, and maybe we won't have to deal with this ever again. Well, you know what? That's fine. That's fine. Just like Tony Smith's son of Jerry Smith that I used to work for in Milan, Tennessee, that said that you don't have no right in cramming this down our throats. Okay, I don't. You're absolutely correct. I don't. But in the meantime, if you're going to be man enough to say that to me, you need to be man enough to realize what the consequences are towards you not listening to me. So Tony Smith, I know that you're making the big money that you're making for up there in Knoxville, Tennessee, working for another sleazy freaking insurance company, but you need to realize that these things that are going to be consequently brought up into your children and your grandchildren's life are the decisions that people like you and others made years ago that has now put us all in jeopardy. You was right. I didn't have a right in throwing it down your throat. But at the same time, you should have had enough sense to be able to read the Bible and identify and interpret the Bible the same way as any other adult was interpreting the Bible. But because you was a denier about the message, because you was a denier about the climate, because you was a denier about all these other things, you pursued your life. But in the meantime, while people like Tony Smith has 2 or 3 homes, probably valued at well over $1 million now, everybody else is suffering. Everybody else is doing without. And now, to top it off, we're seeing environmental changes that is destroying communities. Not just destroying 1 or 2 lives, but destroying whole communities. This is what the people in Waverly, Tennessee, that happened to them about 2 years ago, this is what they need to think about. They need to think about these people that didn't want to hear people like Al Gore, didn't want to hear people like us, that now, today, we're all suffering the consequences of. Good luck to all of us as we end this report. God bless America. God bless the Ukrainians, because this is a special moment pertaining to what's went on here at this summit, this NATO summit. God bless the Ukrainians. God bless those who are standing up for the same causes pertaining to democracy all over the world. And God bless our American troops, because without them, we would be defenseless in being able to have any influence at all, much less the influences in our own country, but the influences of the world all over the world. Thanks again. Good luck and shalom.